know where I'm supposed to be looking.
You look at Howard.
Well, I'd rather look at you, but
Flattery will get you.
We've been joined by Douglas Meriwether Campbell, who is a partner in the firm of Campbell and Campbell here in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and one of the lawyer sons of Paul, his dad. Doug, we've asked you to join us for a little while to share with us some stories that you would like to tell us about your dad, to give us some additional insight into your father, the lawyer.
Thank you, Howard. I'll be brief. One of the things about my dad that I wasn't aware of before I started practicing law with him was how much research he does. And he reads cases all the time. Every advance sheet that comes out, he's read it. Slip opinions, just reads them all the time. He's here Saturdays and Sundays, just reading like there's no tomorrow. I had gotten out of law school, and he asked me to help him with a little research project one time. And I don't know if he was defending a product suit or an arson suit, but it was an area that I had not learned in law school. I was coming from a background having been on the law review, and he told me he wanted me to find him a case on a certain area. So I took this assignment. I said, okay, I'll be glad to do it. And this was in the days before computers and premise and word searches and the like. And I got to looking for it, and I didn't have a clue. I couldn't find it, and I looked, and I looked, and I thought, well, I need just a little more information. And I didn't want to show him how dumb I really was to just tell him I was floundering around. So I went back to him and I said, boss, can you give me a little help with this? Do you think, do you know what court came out with this opinion or about what year it was? He said, no, can't help you. So I looked some more and I couldn't find it. By this time, I'm running up a pretty good bit of time for something that I'm having no success finding. And I went back to him and I said, you know, I really can't find this case. Do you remember the name of either one of the parties? And he said, darling, if I knew that, I'd have found it myself. And this light clicked on. It dawned on me that he didn't have a specific case that he was looking for, that he just knew this principle of law had been decided, and he figured that, you know, if I was smart and had gotten out of law school, then any idiot ought to be able to find it. And I just thought this was very peculiar until I'd been practicing law about 20 years. And I got to that point when I instinctively realized in whatever area I'm doing research that there's got to be a case that says this or says that. But that was an eye-opening experience to me as a young lawyer, that you would develop instinctive feels for cases and principles that must be out there and have to be decided by some court somewhere. One of the early experiences I had, and I guess I had practiced law about 2 or 3 years and tried a fair number of jury cases. I think for young lawyers, the getting into the practice is often a roller coaster kind of experience, full of highs and real lows, and it's just kind of an uneven emotional experience. And I had gotten a bad ruling either out of a sessions judge or a chancellor or a judge sitting without a jury in some kind of motion, and I was just down about it, kind of dejected that I thought the judge hadn't followed the law as it obviously was. Anybody could see our position was right, and somehow this judge had missed it. And it was time to go home that day, and I got in the elevator. My dad happened to be leaving at the same time. He got in the elevator with me, and I was kind of looking at the ground, just not saying much. And he looked at me and he said, nobody ever said life was easy or fun. And I thought, wait a minute, time out. Why didn't you tell me this a long time ago? You know, the practice of law is supposed to work, and it's supposed to be orderly, and judges are supposed to follow the law, and it's all supposed to work out nicely. And he hit the nail on the head, and it was a lesson that took a long time to learn and to be able to handle with equanimity, and it was something that stood out with me. We've always called it and joked about it in the family as the great elevator truth. So those are two of the things I'd say about my dad, and insights into him just that I've got through practicing law.
Thank you, Doug. What would you assess as your father's greatest strength or attribute as a lawyer?
Integrity, I would say. And right behind that, I would say just ferociously tenacious and competitive. Those two things, I would say.
Thank you very much for sharing this with us. We've been joined by Michael Ross Campbell, who is a partner in the Chattanooga law firm of Campbell and Campbell. Mike is one of the lawyer sons of Mr. Campbell, and we've asked Mike to join us for just a few minutes to share with us some stories about his dad that will give us some additional insight. Mike, thank you, and the floor is yours.
I recall when I came back, my father was alone and practicing by himself. And in thinking about what would be appropriate to say here, I recall that my father's admonition and advice was that I would not limit myself in the type of work I did. And I had work that came from him, mostly defense type work, which he did. But I was able to pick up some other not so lucrative work in order to get experience as a young lawyer, including some collection work, low-end divorce, representation of defendants in juvenile court, 2 children who killed other children and were charged with murder and were going to be tried as adults. So all this is to say that my father encouraged me to practice in whatever field we could get business in. And so I got a taste of a variety of legal work, not necessarily with my father's assistance, since he had very limited experience in the criminal field, and was somewhat on my own until Paul showed up 6 or 8 months later, and of course Paul was of fairly limited use at that point. I think part of that practice in fields other than defense work, which was my father's primary area of practice, 2 cases that I recall, 2 plaintiff's cases my father encouraged me to take. One, the brother of a man who had worked for our family for many years. His name was Ollie Patton, and he worked for my parents for many years. His brother was hit by a police car while crossing Market Street in the 1970s. And his brother's name was Eli Patton. And Eli was crossing Market Street one evening in a rain with an undetermined blood alcohol level when he was struck by a police car driven by Ronnie Harris, who worked in the photo and identification section. And so Ollie had talked to my mother, and then my mother mentioned something to my father, and so my father said, "Why don't you look into this?" And I looked into it and determined that based on my limited experience, it didn't look like too good a case. But I was encouraged to take the case and did, and file suit against Mr. Harris in the city of Chattanooga. And this case went to trial in Division II of Circuit Court before one of our judges who's still on the bench, Sam Payne. And I lost, which I should have lost. This was a case that my dad encouraged me to take, and then encouraged me to take it up on appeal because the trial judge had failed to give some of the 14 or 15 jury instructions that we had determined were applicable in this case. So the case went up to the Court of Appeals, and this was probably the 2nd or 3rd trip I'd made to the Court of Appeals, maybe 1977. And the Court of Appeals was not unkind to me and affirmed the judgment below. A second plaintiff's case that my father thought that we should pursue, and which I wound up trying, was for a employee of a local liquor store that he knew, young man and a small man named Paul Sobel. Paul was maybe 5'5" or 5'6", diminutive, 120 pounds, and Paul was driving his car and was struck or bumped in the rear by a vehicle driven by a man named John Grant, who lived in our neighborhood on Lookout Mountain, and there was a knot in Sobel's bumper about this big. Well, Sobel just complained of an awful whiplash and neck and shoulder pain and whatnot, and so my father thought that I ought to take a crack at this case. So I filed suit for Sobel, and we tried this case for a day and a half in circuit court. My dad was absent, doing more lucrative things, undoubtedly, and the jury returned a verdict in Sobel's favor for $213 after 2 days. So those are two cases that I can recall my father encouraging me to take and pursue, and frankly, I learned a lot from those two cases.
What about the case of the air conditioner?
I don't
The air
recall.
conditioner case?
The judgment, the suit against our buddy at the YMCA.
Oh, that's right. There was a fellow that went to the YMCA that we knew named Randy Cornell.
Nice guy.
Nice guy. And we had the chance to file a lawsuit against Randy, and Daddy wasn't going to discriminate and not sue somebody we knew, so we sued Randy. And I think we did win that case. And Daddy's very democratic and wouldn't discriminate against who we might sue in those days. So those plaintiffs' cases are one thing that jumps out at me about my early years in practicing. You did it all. You did everything. And the one other experience that I recall from early on, I had the benefit of trying cases with my father in the early years. I was the only one that was back here for 10 months or so. And I'm probably tried 8 or 10 or maybe a dozen jury trials with my father over a period of 2 or 3 years after I came back and started practicing, which was a great benefit. And we defended a lawsuit against Gibson's discount store, where a patron, an invitee at the store, had been shoplifting and had been detained by our client's employees for shoplifting. And the jury didn't agree, I don't think, that she'd been shoplifting. And we tried this case and lost. And my father thought that there was something untoward about the jury verdict and directed me to go out and interview all the jurors, which is generally a thankless task, but which I did. And lo and behold, there was something wrong with the jury verdict, which I don't recall now, what they'd done wrong, whether they had been poisoned by information about insurance or what had happened. But I came up with a number of affidavits from the jurors confirming this misconduct, which my father then filed with a motion for new trial. This case was tried before now retired Circuit Judge Tom Walker. Tom was inclined to be irascible, and Tom did not like this motion for new trial and was apparently unaware of the right of counsel to interview jurors following trial. We have no local rule prohibiting that. And unaware of the right to obtain an affidavit from a juror. And he certainly didn't like the fact that it had been done by a lawyer who'd been practicing law about 1 year. And he didn't like the fact that his judgment was suspect. His judgment entered on a jury verdict. So when the motion for new trial was argued, Judge Walker let his displeasure be known. And the hearing didn't get very far and was adjourned, and Judge Walker let it be known that he thought that the acts of counsel for the defendant my father and me were probably in contempt of court for some reason, and that when the hearing reconvened, we had better have counsel to represent us. So, out of law school, about 15 months at this point, I was thinking this is not a great way to make a living. And so my father got a couple of local lawyers, one to represent me and one him, because he wanted to separate himself from me in case I was the one that had violated something and was in contempt, so we'd be separate in case I was the one that was going to go down the tubes at this hearing, I guess. We had a hearing in front of Walker, and of course my father couldn't testify because he hadn't gone out and done any of this. But I took the witness stand and was examined by my attorney, who I recall was Leroy Phillips. Maybe you were represented by Jim Lee, I'm not sure. You had one or the other. And I was examined, and then Judge Walker chewed us out, and there was a hearing between our attorneys and Judge Walker in chambers, and Walker was persuaded that we had the right to do what we had done. And the threat of me being held in contempt of court was removed, and I don't recall how the case resolved, but
We appealed and won.
we did?
Yeah.
Okay. That experience has stuck in my head over the last 23 years, being threatened like that early on for absolutely no reason and with no basis. And it also stuck in my head my father's response to it, which was not to lay down, but we got counsel and we appealed the case, and as he said, it was reversed. So,
Just reversed and dismissed.
yeah.
And also, onto that, I think that Judge Walker talked to another judge, and the other judge told him, "Don't be crazy, Tom."
Right. That they had the right to do what they had done. So,
To say that Tom was irascible at that time puts it mildly.
yes.
But to his credit, I guess it might be said that he did have physical problems, where he had to take nourishment in the mornings, or otherwise he was further off kilter.
So, I think that is enough from me.
Mike, thank you. Just one question. If you were assessing your father's greatest strength or attribute as a lawyer, what would that be?
Thoroughness,
Thank you.
investigation, research, to be completely prepared at the time of trial.
Thank you. We've been joined by Paul Campbell III. Paul is one of the lawyer sons of Mr. Campbell. Paul is a former member of the firm of Campbell and Campbell and now partner at Witt, Gaither and Whitaker here in Chattanooga. Paul, we have given you the opportunity to close in our family session with what has been a most pleasant and interesting interview opportunity with your dad. We've asked that each of you provide us with some story or more than one, if you choose, that will provide us with some additional insight on your father, the lawyer. So I'm going to turn it over to you and let you share with us what you wish.
Howard, there are probably two short stories, I guess, that I would tell you. They're not really stories. They're things I have probably learned about practicing law from my father. My father is not given to abstraction, so I really had to learn them by being around him and watching and experiencing. He didn't give me the short, easy answer early on where I could just memorize it and get on to the next course. I think the first one that I learned was when I first started practicing law with Daddy. You know, you're right out of law school. You've had a lot of substantive law courses. You've thought about substantive law in terms of the bar exam. And there were a number of different kinds of cases in the office when I came here. You know, there was a lot of automobile negligence stuff. There was some products liability. There was medical malpractice. And every now and then there'd be something exotic, you know, like civil rights or antitrust allegations. And as I watched my father, early on, I began to be a little concerned because he didn't seem to know the difference in any of these types of cases. I thought, this could be a bad sign. After I got a little further into the practice of law, what I discovered was, from his perspective, and now from mine, there wasn't a difference. You know, there were only two things that you needed to worry about as a lawyer. One was doing your research so that you knew what the law was in the area, and the other was getting your facts. And that was what, as a trial lawyer, those were really the only two things you ever needed to worry about. And watching him, I finally figured that out, and it was a matter of doing both and continuing to do both. You know, as you kept working on a case, you kept doing research, and you kept looking for more facts. And that was really what it came down to, were facts and law. The second thing that I think I have learned from working around him is that the practice of law isn't a sprint. You know, it's a distance run. That it's easy to get excited about doing well on a big case that's glamorous or has some sex appeal or that you're getting well paid on. But that what counts is, you know, to answer the bell every round and to go out and do a good job on whatever you do, whether you're getting paid or not, whether it's big or not, whether anybody notices or not. And it's interesting to me, I think it was Doug I was talking to sometime within the last couple of months, and he was talking about Daddy going up to try a case in General Sessions Court and being excited about it. And I thought, you know, that's the way he is, and that's really to me, the goal in terms of being a lawyer is, you know, to try to learn to answer the bell every round and to do a good job, do as good a job on the little stuff as you do on the big. That's sort of the two things I guess I think about when I think of my father.
Paul, thank you very much. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Rolling.
But 10 seconds sufficient? Okay.
I couldn't say that.
Do that again.
Knife in his neck. In case anybody didn't think we were affectionate with each other.
That's right. Okay, now everyone look right in the lens, and let's have a serious look for a moment. And that's enough of that. Okay.
That's too much great elevator.
Well, that goes a long way.
That's right. Okay.
We can be real grim.
Well, we're getting a nice mix. That's good. Okay, I think we got some good stuff there.
Good.
Are
Oh,
we
you mean
all
you've
for it?
done what you were going to do? Yeah, you've
All
done
right,
it?
let me get one picture when you're all looking at me.
All right.
We're
And
looking at Howard and stuff.
will you give
Or
us
you
a
can
copy
look
if
at
you get
Howard.
one that's decent?
Sure, I'm going to take two as a matter of fact.
You have to take more than get one decent
All right,
one.
1, 2, 3.
Yeah,
If you take 6, you'll get maybe a decent one of each of us. We
Yeah,
won't
maybe.
be in the same picture.
All right, 1, 2, 3. Okay, I think we ought to find something out of that.
I'd like to have a copy, just to show we were once together here.
I'll be happy to do that.
All in the office at once.
Now, do I need